Thank you for coming. I'm Josh Ginsberg. I'm the president of the Carey Institute, and thank you for coming to Friday Night at the Carey. We have another wonderful talk tonight in our series of lectures, but before that I've got a couple of announcements. First of all, unfortunately for all of you, there's been some really good positive reinforcement. For those of you who have come to these talks before, I like to point out on the back of the seats as you come in, you might have noticed that there were some seats up in front that remained empty at the last minute, and then people came in and blithely sat down in those seats. Well, those seats had their names on them, and they had their names on them because they are members of our Aldo Leopold Society. And I've been making this announcement every talk, and we keep getting more members of the Aldo Leopold Society, so I'm getting what's known as positive feedback. Right? So if you too would like to have your own seat, please go online or pick up a brochure afterwards and consider joining the Aldo Leopold Society. The funds we get from this are instrumental in supporting our education, outreach, and public events. So not only do you get a seat, but you feel good about sitting there. So please do consider it. We have a couple more events coming up on Wednesday. It is July 15th at 6 p.m. Callie Bird, who used to be an educator here and is still a friend and colleague, will be talking about the invaders around us. She'll be doing a walking tour of invasive species on our property. Yes, we have invasive species on our property, as you do on yours. You may not know it, but they're there. It will be family friendly, so kids, grandkids are welcome. Please do try and sign up online, but it should be a great talk, and we're hoping for a beautiful sunny evening. We have a butterfly adventure on Sunday, the 9th of August at 10 a.m. Barry Haraz will lead a lecture and a walk around the property looking at plants and hopefully butterflies that are supported by those plants. And then finally, on Friday, the 21st of August, our next Friday Night at the Carey will be our very own trustee, Alan Shope, who will be talking about the environmental impacts of architecture. If, like I, you don't know how much carbon is in a gallon of gas, or a quart of fuel oil, or every time you turn on your stove and cook an egg, and what that means in terms of our consumption, how it relates to buildings. It'd be a great talk, and I think it's one of those things that we all think we know something about until we hear somebody who's really an expert in the field. Which brings me tonight to our expert in the field. Roland Kays is a zoologist, conservation biologist, curator. He's a man with broad interest in ecology, but is particularly passionate about mammals, furry things. And Roland has pursued a career that I think is very interesting because it really is a cutting-edge career in many, many ways. So Roland, like I and many people, grew up sort of tracking mammals, understanding how mammals move, putting radio collars on them, and standing like this and going around in circles, trying to triangulate where the mammals were. But in the course of his work, and Roland has worked in a number of places, he was local for many years. For 11 years, he was the curator of mammals at the New York State Museum in Albany. Then he migrated south to North Carolina, where he directs the biodiversity lab at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. He's also a professor at North Carolina State University. But Roland has sort of evolved and is at the forefront of evolving the techniques by which we track and understand the distribution, abundance, and behavior of organisms like mammals. So he's been very involved with using sort of GPS collars and GPS systems that go on a collar, radio collar, and allow us to get really intimate data on minute-by-minute movements of animals. But that's just the beginning. Roland's also interested in the architecture and use of data in the long term. So he's involved with two projects, one of which is a collaboration with Smithsonian, is that right, eNamel? Which eNamel intends, you might see in newspapers and things, pictures of animals in the forest that are taken with automatic cameras that have sensors on them that trip the cameras when an animal walks by. Well, eNamel is a citizen science project also working with scientists to collect and archive that information because so much information gets lost. And we collect it, we use it, and then there's all this other information we collect that never gets used. And so eNamel is a web-based tool to try and collect those things, but also to allow people to see what's in their backyard, literally. There's also a project that Roland's involved with called MoveBank. Again, many of us collect lots and lots of data on the movement of mammals and animals in general. And then it sort of sits, as mine does, on a computer file or in a file drawer somewhere, and it never gets used. And MoveBank allows scientists and naturalists around the world to upload these data into the database and have them available not just for this generation, but for future generations. And those are, in a sense, big data projects, and big data is a part of the future. My favorite thing that Roland's involved with, he sits on the board of something called Icarus. And Icarus is the first, are you going to talk about Icarus?
No.
Okay, good. So I'll talk a little bit about Icarus. Icarus is the first time we're going to have a set of satellites devoted to studying animal movement. It's a little embarrassing to say European Union and the Max Planck Institute in Germany is leading on this. It's not an American invention, but we have some Americans on the board and a lot of global interest in the driving of this process. It's really, really important because if you have dedicated satellites, you can put very, very little tags. And Roland told me just before that the first one's going to be about 5 grams or less than a quarter of an ounce. Right? And that's tiny compared to the monstrous things we have to put on mammals and birds these days. It will give us insights into the way in which animal movement occurs and how that relates to population structure and species persistence in a way that we've never been able to do before. It's going to be really groundbreaking. It will also give us lots and lots and lots of data. And as with all big data, we're going to be more like astrophysicists in the future than we are now. Anyway, in his spare time, when he's not writing an app or doing the thing, Roland actually writes books, right? Good old-fashioned books with papers. And this is The Mammals of North America. Roland and Don Wilson, the Smithsonian, wrote the book. It's outside if you'd like a copy of it afterwards. I was leafing through it. This one is now mine. I'm going to have to go pay for it. So it's a pleasure to introduce Roland. He's going to talk about the return of predators to urban America. It's a topic I care deeply about, and it's one that I think is one of the leading indicators of where we're doing some things right in conservation. So Roland, thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks for that nice introduction, and thanks everyone for coming. Wow, it's great to see a full house of people excited to hear about predators, or maybe you want to be afraid of the predators that are coming into your backyard. Don't worry, it's not dangerous. It's really exciting for me to come back to New York State, a place I really love, especially in the summer, and to get a chance to walk around your backyard. Well, not your backyard, but your neighborhood. I wasn't in your backyard, but in Millbrook a little bit. Beautiful place. And kind of out in the suburbs, out in the country a little bit. But I think, a lot of what we worry about on our planet is like what we see from from space with all the lights and, how much of the planet we are starting to cover with ourselves and our infrastructure, and how are we leaving room for animals. And I think when we see pictures like this from Mexico City of just hill after hill of humanity, there's no room for animals. Is there room for animals in these setups? And it has become so pervasive that geologists have started to weigh in and say, geologists have this history of Earth with these different eras that relate to what the major biological, geological, physical processes were on Earth going back many, many millions of years ago. And they recently decided that we're in a new era called the Anthropocene. And when exactly this started, whether it was 1950, 1700s, we are clearly in the Anthropocene today. Humans are the major factor that's changing Earth, whether it's the land, the air, the sea. This is a cool graph that sort of shows, not biomes like tundra and rainforest, but what they call the anthromes, which go from densely settled areas that are dark red to semi-natural and wildland areas, and sort of different levels of impact that can be boiled down to areas that are used by people, that are semi-natural, and that are wild. And so this shows what the world looked like in about 1700, in 1800, in 1900, and moving up to today, where more than half of the land on Earth are really being used by people, and much less in semi-natural and very, very little in wild. And you can see where that's occurring on the planet. And we know this from a variety of satellite data that show land use, satellite data like this that show temperature that we're using to track the rise of temperatures around the globe that makes headlines every year. But we can't see animals from these satellites. Very rarely can we actually see an animal. It's very hard to survey these animals that are hiding from us. And We know that some of them are doing really badly, like the Javan rhino survives in one tiny little corner of one small little island. Other species are doing quite well. Thank you very much. And how this varies from species to species, from one area to the other, is some really important questions. And when you think about the raccoon, in some ways the raccoon was pre-adapted to do well in human settlements, right? And pre-adaptive is an evolutionary term, meaning they already had some adaptations, some sort of tricks that it turns out worked really well in cities. They have a high social tolerance, right? You could never get 25 wolves to stand next to each other like this, right? They would all tear each other apart. Raccoons, they can chill out with each other, even though they've got pretty good canines. They're omnivorous, probably the third most omnivorous species on the planet after humans and black rats. And so they've done quite well. But other species are adapting now as well. In India, leopards are eating dogs not only in the outskirts of town, but they're actually walking into apartment buildings, killing dogs and walking out with them. This is a behavioral adaptation that these animals have. And in the countryside, dogs are kind of running wild. But in here, this is clearly a much different behavior adaptation. And in North Carolina, we have our own situation. As some of us very, very concerned, squirrels stealing nut-based candy bars out of CVS's, out of giant bins of toilet paper. So what we're talking about here is evolution, changing of the animals to live and survive in the Anthropocene. Evolution needs variation. That means there need to be some variants that happen to be able to survive. If you only have 15 animals left, that's not the variation that you need to have one that happens to show an adaptation that's useful. And often, the evolution can be population specific. Like leopards don't all of a sudden, all around the world, learn how to hunt dogs, right? That happens in certain areas in India. The ones in South Africa don't do that. And you could have different animals in New York City doing something different than animals in Chicago, because they're not all connected. And it can be very fast. We used to think evolution was this thing that happened over millions of years, and now we know it can happen over a few generations, which for some animals goes very fast. And sometimes it can actually be learning. It might not even really be genetically coded, but if it's a behavior that's passed on and on and on, that is a type of evolution that animals can adapt through this. So what I'm going to be talking about today is some examples of adaptations that carnivores have evolved to survive in the Anthropocene, to move close to us in our cities. Some common factors that might promote that, talk about some successes in North America, and then kind of end by showing some data and some examples from our e-mammal camera trap project, where we have volunteers like you guys collecting data, helping to collect this data. So the story of North American conservation of wildlife is a story of a great crisis about 100 years ago, where we had chopped down almost all the forests. This shows how the forests declined over, this is up to 1920. We had sent out groups of men with guns and dogs and ropes to kill all the predators, and there was almost nothing left by the turn of the century, and certainly no animals in the cities, right? But and from that story, you sort of start to worry that this is what we have today. It's all humanity, but in fact, a lot of the forest came back. And so what we have here, all these people are living in the forest. And you guys know that. You're up here in the greenest area. The forest grew back. A lot of the animals were allowed to come back. Modern game management was born in the early 1900s, where they realized, and Aldo Leopold was one of the ones who really pushed for it, among others, that we can't just go out and shoot everything all the time. We need to have seasons, we need to manage it, we need to regulate it, and then we can have a sustainable harvest, to the point now where there's too many deer in some places. But you get the idea. And this is just an example of what it looks like, what Raleigh looks like, and you can do similar types of maps. I just made this looking at Google Earth. Here's downtown Raleigh, 10 miles outside of town, 20 miles outside of town. There's a lot of forest. Even here, where these people are living, there's a lot of natural habitat, and you get these mosaics in the more rural areas. And these carnivores are starting to make a comeback. And one example that's very famous are the pumas, the cougars, mountain lions, it's all the same thing, that live in the hills outside of Los Angeles, California. This is an amazing shot from National Geographic last year with the lights in the background. And they are living right next to people. They're not roaming the streets in LA, but they are living very close to people, surviving over many, many generations, and biologists are working very hard to find ways to maintain some genetics, because now they're starting to have an inbreeding problem because they're not getting the connections. But in other parts of the country, the cougars are moving much closer to people. This is a picture from a friend of mine who lives in Boulder, Colorado, that he got in his backyard, and he lives kind of in town. The animals are coming down off the front range, going to the neighborhoods looking for deer, and then moving back out. This is the mountain lion that's actually got a collar on from another study out there. Wolves are another example. Not that they're moving to cities yet, that we know of, but of how behavior can change. And this graph shows the increase in wolves in the Great Lakes areas over a couple decades. And you can see, for a long time it was stable, and then they really started coming back. And this shows both the number of packs and the number of individual wolves. And there was a study around here, before they really started taking off, that said, looked at where wolves lived and said, there is a threshold of road density. If you have too many roads, you don't have wolves. And this is the threshold, 0.45 kilometers of road per kilometer square of area. Well, a couple years later, they had to change that, because guess what? The wolves were using a lot more areas. Oh, actually, it's still a threshold, but it's double. And then just a couple years later, they're like, actually, the average is above the threshold. So that just shows you that as the population was recovering, the behavior of the animals changed. They begin to learn how to tolerate, how to live with people. Of course, they also had some protection against hunting, so that helped. But it shows you how what we knew about animals just a couple decades ago is not necessarily still what's happening, because the animals are changing. They are dynamic. And now there are tons of wolves in Europe, and this has snuck up on people. All of a sudden, there were these wolves. I had no idea how many wolves there were. All these different wolf packs living in Germany. This is northern Germany. There's wolves in Denmark now, and the people in Denmark are just flabbergasted. They're like, we don't have any nature left. How are these wolves surviving? They don't know how the wolves are surviving. They don't really know where they are. They see them every once in a while. They find a dead deer every once in a while, but they're really flabbergasted at how the wolves are coming back. Those are a couple highlights, some big animals, cougars and wolves. Well, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail into some work that we did in Albany on fishers. Fishers are kind of a big weasel species. You'll see some more pictures of them here. And they were, historically, they follow the same trajectory of almost going extinct 100 years ago. They only survived in a few places in the Adirondacks and up in Maine in the Northeast. And the reason, part of it was because their fur was so valuable. But now their population has come back. Fur trapping was forbidden for a while. Now you can trap again. You can see a fur trapper in Maine who has quite a lot of animals in one season. Roger Powell is kind of the dean of fishers, and he's written some books about fishers. And for a long time, they were thought to be this habitat specialist that required mature forests. They were like the species that you hold up for, we need old growth, we need this really deep, dark, old forest, we have to protect all this land because the fishers really need that. And so here you can see, I mentioned their recovery. This is where they survived about 100 years ago when we wiped them out in both places in the Northeast. And then you can see where they've recovered to. And you can see their historic range in gray. And so they've had a really strong recovery in the Northeast. They're still spreading. I heard today that you've had them on your property here for probably about 10 years. And they're doing okay in the mountain Midwest, but in the intermountain West, but in the far West Coast, they're not doing very well. There's a lot of effort to reintroduce them, to study their habitat, try to figure out how to help them survive, because there's interesting differences between the East and the West Coast. And I'll come back a little bit to why that might be. But this was a picture that we got in Albany in 2000. And this is in the Albany pine bush. And, I had in my brain that fishers were this old growth species. And now we've got them in Albany. And so I was really surprised and pretty excited about it. And this is what the landscape looks like. You've got sort of a little nature preserve, the Albany Pine Bush, big mall, streets, suburbs. And this is where they're moving. They're moving right through these little skinny areas. So this is what a fisher looks like when they're tranquilized. If they were tranquilized, they'd be chewing our hands off right now. You can see me taking a tiny little snip of the ear for a DNA sample. This is my student Scott LaPointe, who did his PhD on these guys, and she's just been given a high-tech tracking collar that helps us study where she went. While we were tracking them, we also did a lot of snow tracking, which is like my favorite thing in the world to do, to get on a fisher trail and follow them around. You learn so much about what they're doing. We picked up anytime we could find a scat. You can see a scat sitting on a little turd sitting on a piece of wood. We pick it up and pick through it. And this is what we found. They were eating in the area. A lot of gray squirrels. Albany was established as a trapper town in like 1609. And there probably haven't been fishers in Albany for 300 years. So these squirrels had it made. But no longer. I heard a story from a guy who saw a squirrel sitting in his backyard eating a fruit in the tree, and the fisher came running up on the ground. The squirrel just kind of looked at it, probably thought it was a dog or cat. Kept eating. Fisher went right up, grabbed the squirrel, and run it off. So they are, fishers can climb trees very well, they can go into holes really well. So they're mostly eating the gray squirrels and the rabbits. I don't think they're killing deer. I think if they can find a dead deer in the winter, that's like this frozen dinner that they can go back to all winter long. So they chew on that. We saw some of those. This is where we found them sleeping. Garbage piles, little holes in the ground. Here's a brush pile behind a house the fisher was living in. And then this is a fisher in a squirrel nest. The squirrels make these leaf nests. We call those fisher bed and breakfasts. So we found a lot of fishers in the urban area, and we wanted to do a comparison of urban to wild. So we went out to Grafton Lakes State Park, which is about 30 minutes outside of Albany, up in the mountains a little bit, and Pitchdown State Forest. And we tried to trap fishers out there, and we had a really hard time trapping fishers out there. We would get them much easier in the urban area. So eventually we ran cameras, just randomized places, running cameras, no bait or anything like this, and we got way more pictures in the urban area than the wild area. So we didn't do, I call this sort of a relative abundance of fishers. It's not an exact count, but there's certainly a lot more activity of fishers in the urban area than in the wild area, which was pretty interesting and a little bit surprising. Why would there be so much more activity? And we don't really know. We found from our tracking data, this is showing you, this is tracking data in Albany, that fishers are active, this is how much they're active, in the early morning, and then during the daylight, they sleep, and then when it gets dark again, they're active. This is all winter data. But you can see they're very nocturnal. Interestingly, we had some camera trap data from the Adirondacks, and in the camera traps, they had this huge peak of activity in the morning. And that's absent in our urban animals, probably because that's rush hour in Albany. It's a bad time to be running around. So it's interesting. I still don't know really how they're catching so many squirrels, because squirrels are very diurnal. So maybe they're getting them all out of their nests. I'm not sure. But they really are strictly nocturnal in the urban area, which is obviously an adaptation to avoid people because we're diurnal. One of the things we found is that the fishers, they're using the forest, but they're also using this sort of unclaimed spaces at night, right? A golf course at night in the winter in Albany, maybe there's a cross-country skier, but basically there's nobody there. And so you can see all these pink dots are where this one fisher was moving, and a lot of times he's in the little tree, in the tree bits. And so they're using this area. Here is a clover leaf between Route 87 and Central Avenue. Two of the, this is a 6-lane highway, 8-lane highway. And look at him, he's foraging in there. I went trucking in there the very next day. I downloaded the data from his collar, saw where he went right in there. There was fresh snow on the ground. I could see his tracks all over the place. He actually went up, you can see on the snow tracks, he went up and looked at the road. And I was like, no, don't cross it. He didn't. He went back down, and there's a culvert here under the road, there's a culvert here under the road, and there's even a culvert here that he used to cross under the road this little strip of sumac trees, and this is like red-tailed hawk hunting territory, right? The fishers going there now. There are rabbit tracks and squirrel tracks in the snow all over the place in this spot. So I'm sure that's why he was there. So he had figured out how to use these tunnels. And here's one of the tunnels we staked out. This is not your classic highway underpass structure, right? This is a half-filled, crappy drainage culvert. But fishers are weasels. Weasels love tubes. I used to have a pet ferret. You throw a tube on the ground, he's in it in a second, right? So in some ways, fishers might be sort of pre-adapted, like the raccoon, pre-adapted to use this network of tunnels to minimize road kills. Now, it wasn't 100%. We got animals killed by roads. Sometimes in the winter, these are torrents of icy water. And we would see fishers walk on the camera trap, walk up, look at it, be like, no, I'm going over the top today. It was not pleasant. So I think if we did have some proper underpasses, they would totally use them. But even these they will use. We also found fishers sometimes cutting right through neighborhoods. Here you can see there was a fisher that was in this was forest, and this was forest. And if he was going to connect them up without going through this neighborhood, he would have to go way, 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 way down here. And so instead he just cut across. And this was another animal I was tracking in the snow, and you can see he goes right past someone's house. Probably at night, most of the people I talked to in these neighborhoods had no idea there was a fisher out there. So here's what the tracking data looks like in detail. This is the Mohawk River, this is the Schenectady Airport, and he crossed the river a bunch. The river was frozen at this time, and so he did cross the river a bunch. But you look at the resolution of this data, there is no guessing where this animal went. We know exactly where this animal went. We know that he crossed the road right there because we have data points every 2 minutes. Right? If you have data points every hour or every couple hours, these lines connecting the points would be not nearly as precise. So we're able to look exactly. And one of the things we wondered is, do animals use corridors? Because in conservation biology, there's this idea that if you have two natural areas, you want to connect them with a corridor so that animals can move back and forth. No one had ever looked to see if animals actually use those corridors. And so I won't go into all the technical details, but we devised a method to use this tracking data to say, did the fisher use corridors? And we were able to identify a number of these corridors in the tracking data. And we found that most of the fishers that we tracked did use corridors. There were actually two that didn't. One was this animal out at Grafton Lake State Park, and this is just a really big natural area. He didn't have to use corridors because it was all natural area. So he didn't have to use it. And then there's this little female that used a tiny home range. This is the Albany Airport right there. Tiny little home range of just about a square kilometer. It was apparently enough for her to survive in. And so she never used corridors. There was a male that used this. Males are bigger and they have to hunt over a larger area. He used a lot of corridors because he had to connect up different forest fragments in different areas. One last thought on the fishers was we wondered why are fishers in the east doing so much better than fishers in the west? And one of the things we thought about was, well, there's no wolves or cougars in the east. Those are potential predators of fishers. So maybe that's part of the difference. So what we did here was we plotted the range of fishers, and we color-coded it based on whether there were more or less predators now than there would have been 300 years ago. And green means less predators. So you can see all in this area, there's a number of predator species like wolves and cougars that used to be here but aren't anymore. And over the west, a lot of those predators are still there, and if anything, there might be new predators like coyotes that moved up into some of those areas. So there was some suggestion, and this is something that's called mesopredator release. It means the medium-sized predators are released from the predation pressure of the large predators. And there's a couple predictions that you can make based on that. And we went and tested those, and we found that, yes, there are fewer predators. Yes, their populations are increasing in those areas in the east. And then we looked at diet of a bunch of different studies, and we found that fishers in the east eat more large prey than fishers in the west, which is another thing you would predict if the large carnivores are gone. And we were actually able to find a significant change in their body size by measuring a bunch of old skulls at the Smithsonian and then a bunch of new specimens that were collected more recently. You can see that on average, eastern fishers have grown, not by a lot, but just by enough that we could get a statistical difference. And it's only been 50, 100 years, so that's still pretty interesting. So that might be part of the reason fishers are doing so well in the east. I want to talk a little bit about coyotes, not a lot, but coyotes are a very important player in the urban ecology ecosystem across all of North America. The interesting thing about them in the east is that they weren't here 50 years ago. We had 100 years ago, right? A couple hundred years ago we had wolves. We killed all the wolves, and then coyotes moved in. And they are sort of a replacement for the wolf. They're not a full replacement. They don't hunt deer nearly as well as wolves do. But here you can see their pathway, and one of the things that we found is that these guys that cut through Ontario and crossed the St. Lawrence Seaway in about 1940 actually have wolf genes in them. So it's kind of the wolf coming back in the coyote clothing a little bit. They're mostly coyote. And then they hybridized with dogs once they got into New York State. So most of the coyotes in New York State are, we've done some genetic tests and found that they're about 80% coyote genes, 10% dog genes, and 10% wolf genes. Has anyone seen a funny colored coyote, like a red coyote or a black coyote, right? So those are the dog genes every once in a while. Every coyote has dog genes, but every once in a while they'll get expressed in that funny color. So we found that these guys that hybridized moved much faster. Look, about the same amount of time, from 1918 to 1940, they moved somehow. Maybe they went through the UP or went through Ontario, we're not exactly sure. Whereas meanwhile, they were slowly moving through Ohio and Indiana. So these guys that hybridized with wolves moved much faster. They grew larger, they had larger skulls, and they shot very quickly down the coast as well. So I want to talk a little bit, I don't want to talk a lot about coyotes, but I want to contrast Chicago coyotes to Albany coyotes, because I think it brings up some interesting hypotheses. Stan Garrett is doing some awesome work in Chicago, and he has tracked over the last decade or so the expansion of the coyote population. Every year, they're having litter sizes up to 12, which is amazing, because they're finding so much food, but they're just eating natural food. They're eating cottontail rabbits, they're eating mice, they're eating, they're not living off of rats. They eat garbage a little bit, but not very much. And mostly rodents. They have a very high annual survival rate. They cross roads every day, no problem. Here you can see an animal using this area, moving all throughout very, very developed land. This is one of Stan's GPS-collared coyotes. We did a study in Albany with Dan Bogan, who was a student with me, and we found same thing. They're eating natural diet, deer, rabbits, etc. They had a 20% survival. Some of them were getting shot, but a lot of them were dying on the roads. Any of our animals that crossed the road, crossed Route 90 or crossed Route 87, either got hit or got hit when they tried to come back. None of them survived. Whereas Stan's animals are doing it every day. And so this has kind of got me thinking, what's the difference between Albany and Chicago? And the biggest difference is just the size. This is the same scale map for looking at down to earth. And if you're going to specialize on a habitat as a species, you need to have a decent amount of that habitat. And in Chicago, you can do that because it's such a large urban ecosystem. Whereas in Albany, you're constantly going to have these country coyotes coming in from all the surrounding areas, and they never even really have a chance because they're getting hit. They're getting hit by cars, and they're very quickly, and they're constantly being replaced. So this is just kind of a hypothesis, but I start to wonder if we're not going to see these big cities have specialized urban coyotes, and these smaller cities not have them nearly as much. And so the things so urban ecosystem size, and then the other thing is how long have they been there? They've been in Chicago for ages, right? But if you look at Albany, they haven't been there. They haven't been there since the 80s. So maybe give them another 50 years and they'll evolve adaptations to cross the road. Stan also has a project in Cleveland, and he says they're not nearly as urban in Cleveland. In Raleigh, they're not nearly as urban, although they might be getting more urban just in the last couple of years. I think New York City is going to be the big test case because obviously a giant urban ecosystem. They haven't been there very long, but my prediction is that you'll have much more urban coyotes in New York City than you will in Albany, just because there's a bigger urban ecosystem for them to colonize. And this will probably take a few decades, but certainly there's more coyote reports this year than there was last year, and more last year than the year before. So we'll see what happens. So I want to transition a little bit now at the end of the talk to talk about our e-mammal camera trapping project. And this is a citizen science project. So we want your help to help us survey these animals. And we've worked with about 500 volunteers so far. And in the initial part of the project, we trained them how to use the camera and gave them the camera and told them where we wanted to run them. And this is the picture from Fred. Fred, that's his real name, Fred. He's a guy from Raleigh who was running the camera for us in South Mountain Game Land, which we were interested in what the animals were like there, and we told him exactly where to run them, and he was going back to pick up his camera. So he'd set it out, and he was going back 3 weeks later, and he was walking down the trail. He's telling us the story later. He's walking down the trail with his buddy, and they're like, this is going to be a waste of time. So they weren't seeing any animals, right? This is what they were seeing when they were going for their hike. And they picked up their memory card, and they're like, this is kind of a bust. And then they came home, and they plugged their memory card into the computer, and they got this guy stared back. And they were like, yes! They were so excited. They were so enthused by it. And Fred has been volunteering for us ever since. He's been totally jazzed by it. And we get excited about it. Well, it's a great picture. But also, we can validate this picture. If Fred, who's not a mammal expert, well, he is now probably, but if he had told me he'd seen a coyote, how do I know it wasn't a dog or a fox? You can't really trust people. I mean, no, I don't want to get into the mountain lions and the Catskills thing with you guys. But, how do you can't, it's not science if you can't reproduce it, if you can't validate it. This is validatable science that you don't need to be an expert to help it. So we can, and we know what time the picture was taken, and if we trust Fred to write down GPS coordinates right, which usually they get it right, we know where it was. So this is what we're talking about with citizen science. We're talking about counting animals, having volunteers out there helping us to run the cameras, and getting these videos of animals so that, as the turkeys walk by, you can count the turkeys. And we can use this as quantified. Are you guys keeping track? How many turkeys are there? And we get shy animals like coyotes. Usually they don't even know it's there. So the great thing about this from a citizen science point of view is we have these photographs are like vouchers that we can verify. And the other part is we know sampling effort. We know how long the camera was out. We know when they put the camera out. We know when they picked it up. So it's a very good way for scientists to get useful data for counting animals. And we get lots of big species that are important to ecosystems, like deer. We get the shy ones like coyotes. We get little guys like chipmunks and squirrels. We're really trying to solve some of the great mysteries out there in the woods. We initially worked across 32 parks. So we had volunteers sample over 2,000 locations. This is a great sample size for asking some of these questions. And initially we were especially interested in the effects of hunting and hiking on wildlife. So does hunting actually, what effect does it have on the whole wildlife community? And are animals afraid of hikers? Because there's been some indication that if you get too much hiking in an area, you're going to drive out the animals. And so we have this experimental setup where, I don't know how we can see it now, but a lot of these parks are paired. And so one of the parks would be like Stone Mountain State Park, where there's no hunting, and then right next to it would be a game land where hunting is allowed. So, same habitat, and we can do a direct comparison. And then we set cameras on the trail and off the trail to see if animals were avoiding the trails. We've also now started working in Raleigh and DC, having volunteers run cameras in different places along a developmental gradient. So here's Washington, D.C., out to Front Royal, Virginia. You get from urbanized to very rural and even some wild areas. And so this is what we're interested in. We're just starting to analyze this data, so I'll show you a little bit of data from some of this, but interested in how far are animals moving into the city? How far have predators moved into the city, and how does that vary from city to city? So camera trap data gets us pictures. Camera trapping gets us pictures. And we, scientists, use the pictures. Well, we love the pretty pictures, right? But really, we want the zeros and ones. We want the data. And so what we get are, for each site, for a given species, we get whether or not it was detected and maybe how many times it was detected. And then we use these data to answer questions looking at what time they were captured or where they were captured and where they were not captured. And this is one example of what we found with white-tailed deer is the housing density around the park had a big predictor of how many deer we got pictures of. And in this case, you can see actually, like Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C. or Umstead Park in Raleigh that had a high housing density around it actually had more deer in the urban areas. I'll skip this part. We also have a paper that just came out this week about coyotes and cats, where it dawned on us after we looked through all these pictures from all these parks that we hadn't seen any cat pictures, hardly any cat pictures. Most of these protected areas, if you look at the cat bar, had no cat. 16 of our 32 protected areas had not a single cat. 14 of them had one single cat. only 2 of them had more than 1 cat protected, and they didn't have very many either. Rock Creek Park has probably tens of thousands of cats in walking distance. It's in Washington, D.C. We got 1 picture of a cat. We got 125 pictures of coyotes in that park. So when we did the statistics, we found that the biggest predictors of where cats are is where there are houses and where there are not coyotes. And if there are coyotes there, there will not be cats there. Where they're kind of overlapping are the small urban forests around Raleigh, the greenways that are still close to houses. I think the cats they feel like they can run back and dive into the porch, then they might go into the woods. But if it's a little further than that, they won't. We found so far very few coyotes in yards in Raleigh. I'll come back to that one again in a little bit though. In terms of the hunting and hiking question, we found not that much of an impact. Things about like habitat, like fragmentation, housing development, some of these other things were more important than hunting. Hunting did decrease the deer. That shouldn't be too surprising, right? That's what everyone's trying to shoot. So we did find that, yes, there was a significant lowering of deer abundance, and it also decreased the raccoons a little bit. The hunters are going to be really kind of pissed to learn that actually it increased the coyotes. And we don't know exactly why, but one of the possibilities is there's some hypotheses out there that predators self-regulate. If they have stable territories, they will keep each other out. I heard a story from a general today about found a fisher that had been killed by another fisher, and that's what predators do sometimes. If you have humans killing a coyote here and there, it breaks down their whole social structure. They don't have these big stable territories, and you get all these immigrants coming in and trying to breed, and you can actually have more coyotes in there. It's counterintuitive. And at some point, I mean, if you get helicopters and gun all the coyotes down, which hasn't been done before, you can reduce their population. But at the recreational level here, we don't know for sure that that's the mechanism. It might be something else. We just know that we get more pictures where they're hunted than where they're not hunted. In terms of trails, there was also relatively little impact. I think most of these animals have habituated to people, and they don't care too much about them. Coyotes, foxes, and bobcats actually use the trails more than they use off-trail, mostly at night. Red fox actually use busy trails more, which we think maybe they're using humans as shields against coyotes, because coyotes are probably avoiding people, and maybe coyotes kill red foxes. So it might be the red foxes are actually trying to stay close to us to avoid their big bad cousin, the coyote. And some of these bears and bobcats did avoid the busiest trails. We can also do temporal analysis. So this is showing, again, over the time of day, from midnight and then daytime. So this is showing you that coyote and red fox are both mostly nocturnal. But we wanted to look at the details because we thought maybe the red foxes were avoiding the coyotes. And the problem with this simple graph is we collected data all different times of the year, and you guys know, 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's light. So what we did was we standardized it for sunrise and sunset. And what we found was that coyotes have a peak of activity a few hours before sunrise. They have another one a few hours after sunset, right? They generally, sunsets, they're real active, they take a little break, they're real active, and then the sun rises. But let's look at this one, because what we found is red foxes, where coyotes are not common, they like to be active that same peak. But where there's a lot of coyotes, the red foxes actually avoid that time period because the coyotes are active. So cool, kind of an interesting sign that these animals are out there interacting, the little guys are trying to avoid the big guys. We get a lot of dog pictures on our trail cameras. 23,000 dog pictures. But most of these were on the trail, and one of these questions, we were wondering, are dogs a problem? Are dogs running amok in our park and causing problems? Not really. Most of them are on the trail. Now, most of them aren't leashed. Only 40% were leashed. But of the ones that we did find off trail, most of them were with a human on trail. Like we could check the on trail camera and see there was a person within a couple minutes. So actually, out of 23,000 dogs, only 33 of them were off trail, not with a human. So that's not really very many. Not surprisingly, we found that as you got further from the trailhead, the dog was less likely to be leashed. Right? We all seen it. Probably some of you do it. You leash a dog when you get out. You look over your shoulder, and if there's no park ranger, you take the leash off once you get a little further away from the trailhead. We were able to look at the colors here, or rather the park had rules. So some parks said you have to have a leash. And they had, that's the yellow line, on average they had higher leashing than parks that didn't require leashing. Some parks said no pets allowed at all, and those were the real rule breakers. As soon as they saw there were no rangers, they were like taking the dog. They were walking the dog. So a little bit about our urban gradient stuff. We want people to help us run cameras from the wild areas, rural, exurban, suburban, up to the real urban areas that are more disturbed. So we can see within this area how far are the animals moving into our ecosystems, and especially how does that vary across different cities. But within each of these areas, there's another gradient that we're looking at as well, which is sort of people's yards, open developed areas like golf courses or cemeteries, the small little urban forests, and then the big forests. And so we've got kind of two scales of disturbance that we're interested in looking at, so that within a suburban area, you can have a yard or you can have a relatively big forest. Now some of these, there's no yards in wild areas and there's no big forests in urban areas, so it's not perfect. But these are where we're having people run cameras. And this is some just very preliminary results. We just sort of taken stock of what we've got and started looking at the numbers a little bit. And we find some, I think, things that you would expect, like possums, which are not very good at avoiding roads or cars on roads. Areas that have a lot of roads, like suburban areas, have less possum activity than the more rural areas. And this is in North Carolina. We can add our DC data in here and see that there's a lot fewer possums in DC, and they generally kind of have the same trend, but it didn't quite go up quite as much in the rural areas. So maybe something different going on in that city. Deer, I was a little bit surprised that there was no real difference from suburban exurban. Look at the Raleigh data. If you're in suburban Raleigh or out in the countryside, you've got deer. You've got a lot of deer either way. But in DC, there's even more deer, and they had a peak in here. And this matches my perceptions from looking at roadkills in DC. There's a lot of dead deer in Virginia around compared to Raleigh. But interesting then, if we look at what about the yards, small forests and large forests, they're using all these areas too, especially in DC. Look how many, way more deer detections. The average yard had deer walk through 1.5 times per day. That's what that means. That's a lot. It's a lot of deer. Of course, most of it's at night when people are sleeping, and they don't realize it until they go out to check their garden. I see that. But interesting that, there's as many deer using yards in DC as there are some of the large forests in the DC area. And you can say the same thing for Raleigh. Coyotes, also, I was surprised in this because I thought it's a little ups and downsy. It's not maybe enough data, but there's not a big trend either way in there being. I thought we were going to get a lot in the rural area and very few in the urban area, and it's not turning out that way. And in terms of the yards, I mentioned in Raleigh, we had very few coyotes. When we were looking at the cats, we had very few coyotes in the yards in Raleigh. But DC, where they also have more deer in the yards, have more coyotes in the yards. So when I was talking about animals in different cities colonizing in different ways, especially in the big cities, maybe having more urbanized coyotes, this suggests that might be happening right now in our DC-Raleigh comparison. It's just two cities, but this is the kind of data we need, collected in comparable ways, so that we can make these comparisons across cities. So the biggest difference between Raleigh and DC and the coyotes is that there's way more in the yards. There's also a really interesting total switcheroo with the foxes. In Raleigh, we have a lot of gray foxes, and in DC, they have a lot of red foxes. I don't know why, if it's a north-south kind of thing, or what. But you can see both of them love the suburban area and decrease as you get further out. And if you look at it relative to yards, they both reach their highest, their favorite habitat is yards. Is backyard. And I think it's really cool because we used to think about, when I was taught about conservation in urban areas, there was the matrix and there was the natural area, right? And yards were the matrix. They were like the ocean that nothing could swim across. And natural areas were the islands that they were colonizing. But this is showing for foxes, there's no matrix. It's all habitat if it's yards. I mean, I'm sure they're not using all the industrialized area necessarily. But why there's this difference between red and gray? So you see, in Raleigh we have a few red foxes, and in DC they have a few gray foxes, but there's really a big difference. And if anyone has ideas on why that would be, I'd love to hear it. So the reason we're able to collect a lot of these data is because we have really good software data management. This is what our volunteers use to upload pictures. They look through the pictures, they click the buttons on what the species are, and then they hit upload. And then it comes to us, and we do an expert review. So every picture gets looked at by one of our experts, someone, often undergrad students in my lab, double checking, and then we archive it at the Smithsonian in a database where we can use it. This is how accurate volunteers were at identifying species. Mostly they're pretty good. They can tell a coyote when they see a coyote. Sometimes they mess up the fox squirrel, gray squirrel thing is hard on black and white pictures. Red fox, gray fox can be tricky on black and white pictures. Some of these, so we told them if you don't know what it is, call it unknown animal, and we'll pay extra close attention. And we've gotten very good at identifying ears and tail tips and hind foot that's in the picture. We've also been evaluating, how was the e-mammal experience, and did you learn, and give them little surveys before and after. And we found that they increased their knowledge, and they increased their confidence in the knowledge. We're actually creating advocates. Most of them were telling other people about their experience. They were sharing their pictures on Facebook. They were advocating for the wildlife. Interestingly, we didn't get a change in attitudes to conservation by any of our participants in this first round. That's mostly because they were sort of the 85%, they all love nature to start with. So we're doing a lot of work with school kids right now and doing surveys of them, and it's you'd be surprised how many of them don't like animals, actually. So it's going to be interesting to see how that experience is. So we're now starting to let other groups use eMammal and give sort of customized web pages. So we have the NC State students are running eMammal camera traps, and they have their own customizable website. We've got a number of other partners that we're just starting to work with. A couple partners kind of beta testing this concept. But the idea is that you could have a Carey Institute camera trap project, and you can be uploading your data here. You can be seeing the summary results and the pictures from your study, and then comparing it to other sites in different areas. This is the NC State students. They ran a project on golf courses recently. We're also working with a lot of middle school kids to help kids participate in real science projects where we don't know what the answer is going to be at the end. They're collecting real data. We're validating all the pictures. We have the way it works is we have some teachers that are interning in our lab right now. We have 4 teachers that are spending a couple weeks writing lesson plans, learning about camera traps, making up research projects, and then we're starting to spread those out to other kids around North Carolina. Hoping to fight, not only the science gap, but also just get kids outdoors and get them engaged in nature, get them taking a hike in the woods, even if it's just to the little patch of woods on their school property. And then get some great pictures. All right, this was not a kid picture, but this is one of our favorite pictures from the mountains. When you get enough pictures, you get some really beautiful pictures of animals. These little snapshots of the wild that really get people engaged. This is a coyote carrying a deer leg. And we've also started working internationally. We got a grant from the State Department to get kids in India and Mexico running camera traps and sharing their pictures with kids in North Carolina. And I was a little worried that in these third world countries, I didn't know what animals they were going to get near their schools. I was a little worried we were going to get all the deer and coyotes and they were going to get some rodents or something like that. But it didn't happen at all. They got some great pictures. Here's a jaguarundi that our students in Mexico got pictures of. This is a sloth. And this is where our Indian kids got this picture, and they were super excited. This is not in a tiger preserve. This is where we need to know, are the tigers using this area between tiger preserves to connect? This is collected by a middle school kid in India and brought and sent to us. And he loved, see how the tiger looks at the camera and breathes on it and steams up the lens for a second? He really loved that because he said to him, that showed him that the tiger knew he was there and knew that people were there and recognized that people were on the landscape. Also, I put a little plug in for a future book. I'll be happy to sign my field guide up there, and maybe I'll come back next year for a book that's in press for next year called Candid Creatures, where I solicited pictures from camera trappers all around the world. So it's got over 600 pictures, the best pictures that anybody's ever collected, sort of telling the science, using the pictures to tell the science stories of what scientists have found using camera traps all around the world. And there's some great pictures in there. We also have a live camera trap that we send out to Twitter. So if any of you are on Twitter, check out the handle CamTrap Live. And these are some little clips that our live camera traps got from a fox den we were monitoring this fall, this spring. It was super fun. You can see the puppies running around. Here you can see a coyote that comes around to check it out and actually steals food from them. It was really exciting. Every morning I would wake up and check my phone to get 300 emails from the foxes and see what had happened, tweet out the best pictures. And we actually just put out a video, if you're interested, where we sort of we filmed me and my postdoc talking about the pictures and talking about the story of this fox den that was really fun. So that's just up on YouTube. You can probably Google around and find it. So one of the things I like about this camera trapping with eMammal is that it fits right in the middle of three things that are very important to me. It's scientific discovery, where we're looking at what affects where animals live and how many animals live there. It's nature conservation, working on endangered species in some parts of the world, and it's also education engagement, getting people excited and connected with nature. These are three different things that are kind of all come together. eMammal kind of fits in the middle of those. And these are also, I'll just give a little plug for my institution, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. If any of you guys get sick and tired of the winter next winter, you want to come down, check something out, come to Roland. We have the biggest globe in the world. This is the globe outside of the museum, of the new research center. Inside the globe, we have this cool theater. You can watch it from a couple different levels. It shows cool videos. You have scientists giving talks in there every day. You can catch a little 15-minute talk. And I run the Biodiversity Lab, which is on display here. So you can see the glass walls. So visitors don't come in on a normal day, but they can see what we're doing. Here you can see someone from the mammal collections actually skinning out an otter. Anytime we're doing specimen prep for the mammal collections, people are really excited to check it out. But we're looking through camera trap pictures. We're sorting through fisher scat right now to see what fishers are eating. Lots of different things that are going on there. And it's trying to get science right out there in the public view. And we get all the time people are like, look, it's a scientist, just to see what a scientist looks like. We're not all lab coats. And I have a lot of women students from NC State working in my lab, and they tell me they always get girls come up to them and say, are you a scientist? You mean girls can be scientists and study bugs? And it happens to them all the time. So really, just having scientists on exhibit, it sounds super corny, right? But we're just doing our thing, right? We're doing it in basements and all around, basement labs all around the world. And to just put us out there where we can see them, and might as well have the space out there and engage and get people excited about science. It's really fun. So I'll just kind of end with this slide, which I feel like this is a slide someone sent to me of a fisher on the beach in Cape Cod. And I think we heard about fishers being old growth specialists. And I think of needing closed canopy all the time. And if fishers can adapt to this environment, then maybe there really is hope for species in the Anthropocene. So this was originally going to be my last slide, and then I got sent this picture from the Bronx last year. This was taken by a police officer. He didn't really know what it was. He took a picture with his phone, and it was definitely a fisher. It turns out some other people saw it as well, and so it hung around for at least a couple days. It seems to not have come back. But think about fishers using tubes, and if they could figure out how to hunt rats, it could be really, really interesting, because they're much better ratters than coyotes are. So this is my last slide until this happened, right? This is the ad for this thing where this coyote was hunting the roof. Like, are we going to have like arboreal coyotes now up there jumping roof to roof, hunting roof rats? I don't know, but certainly it shows you the curiosity and the adaptability of species. So that really is the last slide. Thanks, everybody. I guess we've got some time for questions. Yeah?
There's a camera trap project going on in upstate New York.
Yeah, so the question was about camera trapping in upstate New York. We have there are a number of other people that are running camera traps in upstate New York. If you're interested in joining eMammal and you have your own camera trap, we're a little picky about the models because we want data to be comparable. So if you have a $50 Walmart model, we don't want the data, but Because it's just because we're really going to use it. We don't just want your pictures for fun. We're really going to use it. So if you go to the email website, you can see where to sign up if you want to do that. And we've got all our training online now, so you can watch a little YouTube video and learn how to run the cameras. We're still we're doing a big website revamp right now. So the website's kind of ugly right now, but in the fall we're going to have a whole new website. We're going to put a little bit more advertising out for people to join us. But you can sign up right now as well. If you look for email.org, you'll find the site.
I wonder how many people in this audience have ever seen a fisher?
How many people in the audience have ever seen a fisher? Oh my goodness. In the wild?
Yes.
Wow. How many people saw a fisher more than 10 years ago? A couple of you, right? So, right, fishers have been moving in just recently, which is pretty cool. How many have seen a coyote in the wild? Bobcat.
Wow.
All right, who else has a question?
Have you got any indication that some people might want to use this data to try to eradicate the wildlife that's in the urban areas?
Well, that's not going to happen. So, I think one of the reasons I think that a lot of animals find urban areas attractive is because there's so little hunting in the urban areas. And, rabbits and squirrels figured that out a long time ago, and they, lost their fear of humans and moved in very close. And what I think is happening now is some of the predators are starting to figure that out as well and realize, I'm actually safer around these suburbanites than I am out in the countryside where there's a lot more hunting. And so I think, we especially in the next release, we'll be offering the camera trap data out for people to use, for research projects. And if some hunter really wanted to find where the most deer walked by, they could find that, find out where that was, and I don't really care, I guess.
You mentioned, which is it? Are the animals figuring it out, or are the ones that moved there the ones surviving?
Well, it's the latter. The question was whether the animals are figuring it out and they're not really, or is it evolution, or is it sort of evolution? It's evolution. The ones that survive better are the ones that have more babies and make more babies, and then those that survive better pass it on and on. So, right, I shouldn't be. I'm using sloppy language a little bit when I say that it's like the species is getting together and having this big conference and deciding what they're going to do. No. The ones that do, this is how evolution works. The ones that do something right. So that's why you need the variation, right? You've got the ones that don't know how to cross the road, and eventually one of them crosses the road successfully for whatever reason, and then that's the one that breeds and reproduces. Yeah.
You mentioned predators killing other predators, but do predators hunt and eat other predators?
Oh, good question. It's a mixed bag. They often will not eat the other predators. If it's their own species, a lot of species will not cannibalize, and a lot of species will not actually eat the other predators. Sometimes they will. I don't know of a real good study, but one of the ideas is that animals that are closely related to you are more likely to have parasites that you could also get. And so that would be a reason for a coyote to kill a fox but not eat a fox. Yeah.
You mentioned the fishers on the East Coast just being slightly larger in body size. Have you noticed that with any other middle-sized predator?
Well, the coyotes evolved rapidly a larger body size through hybridizing with wolves. So that's one case. Those are the only two I've looked at. But I'm not sure. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're expanding to other countries as well. Is there anyone on the West Coast that's also part of your...
Yeah, so actually we're working with one guy very closely named Robert Long, who works out of the zoo in Seattle, and he's putting together a network of people. He's kind of one of our beta testers right now. And there's a group in LA. I think LA is so ready to do citizen science camera trapping right now. We've been talking with the National Park people and the LA County Museum and some students at UCLA, and they've got the cameras, they've got the people, they're ready to do it. We're sort of just wait till our new website comes out in the fall, and then we'll get it going. So.
Do you have some way of figuring out the actual number of animals in regard to the number of photographs of animals?
Right.
Because you could be taking the picture of the same animal over and over again.
Right, good question. So the question is about how do you actually count animals when you have these pictures, because you couldn't be getting the same animals over and over. And we all have spot and stripe envy, right? The jaguars, the ocelots, you can identify individuals based on the spot pattern and the stripe pattern. You can't do that with coyotes, you can't do it with deer. Well, actually, you can do it with male deer, and we do it. With male deer, you can identify their branching patterns, and you can do it that way. So instead, we're using indices, measures of abundance that are relative, right? So, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. There's one analysis is called occupancy analysis, where you look at the proportion of sites that are occupied by the species or completely absent from the species. And then we also because we use our cameras without bait, and we have somewhat of a randomized design, which is kind of basic ecological design, is to randomize when you put them out, then the number of pictures we get is an indicator of how many species, how many animals are there. On average, if you just run one camera, yeah, you might get it right next to their den, and you'll get 10,000 chipmunk pictures. But if you run 100 cameras, that's going to average out, and you're going to get a good measure for an area. Yeah.
I have a concern about the general public tends to, in my experience, the general public tends to vilify and demonize these apex predators that are critical to our ecosystem. And how is your research able to at least get more information out there? And because to me, I think people fear what they don't understand. And I mean, look what happened with the wolves in Yellowstone, and what happened. It was devastating when they were taken out, and then once they were put back in, the ecosystem settled itself. So what is your research? How are you able to get this out there and alleviate people's fears, or what can we do as activists?
So the question is about, predators play such an important role in the ecosystem, especially the higher predators, and when you lose them, you have lots of problems, but some people really don't like living with predators. And so it's a tricky balance, and I think the camera trapping has the potential to deal with that in two ways. One is, the data will tell the story of what's going on in a particular area, the data. But the other side, I think, is the people, is the pictures, and the connections that can give to people, especially running your own camera. How many people have run a camera trap before? All right, a good number. That moment when you pull the memory card out, it's like Christmas, right? It's like, what am I going to get? It's really fun, and it's engaging. And when you get I also sometimes make the analogy that it's kind of like fishing, right? You get the squirrels and the chipmunks, and those are like the little panfish, but you're waiting for that the big game, right? The big catch to get the cougar or the wolf. That would be like, oh, I got you get so excited about it. So I think the experience of running the cameras is something that can connect the people with the animals in a different way, and then potentially, they share the pictures and they can make impact other ways.
One more question?
Okay, one more question. Yeah.
It's a multi-parter.
Say again?
It's a multi-parter question.
No. Okay, we're done. Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
How many traps do you have over in New York? I know the question was sort of asked.
Yeah.
What are the closest traps to Milton? And that's
Do you want to answer? Do you have any idea how many? Are you guys running cameras in Melbourne? You? Not on the land?
Yeah, we've got camera traps on our property.
Okay.
So they're around the corner.
How many? A dozen? 2 dozen?
Like 20?
are you all working with
We're not on email yet.
No, we haven't really opened our arms yet to everybody, because we know it's going to be a flood and we need to be ready for it. And so that's why we're working now with some beta testers and working and getting sort of the new software released. So we'll get them signed up later. But we do have, I think we have 2 or 3 people in the area in upstate New York running cameras already actually with us. And one of the things that I'm excited about is working with Ithaca College and Pace University and a couple other colleges to have the students running cameras as part of the course, where they learn how to run cameras in the first lab, and then they run them on their own during the semester, and then at the end of the year, they have a data analysis lab where they get to see what they get and then make comparisons with other universities. And so we've been working with some people, and I think we're going to get that going this fall.
So can we thank Roland for absolutely wonderful job?
I'll go ahead and run up and sign books. and then
Yes,
I'll let
so
you-
Roland will be upstairs signing books, answering questions. I just want to say, I'm old enough to remember taking film out of camera.
Oh, yeah.
And taking it to be developed. Those of you who don't know what film is, can talk about it later. So last but not least, please, I will focus on Friday, August 21st at 7 p.m., our next Friday lecture. Alan Shook will talk about the environmental impacts of architecture. Please come back soon. Thanks.